Thanks for pressing play. This is the Pirate Street Journal. 3 topics from business, tech, enterprise software, and the consumer, all through a category design lens. 10 minutes per topic, 30 minutes total. I'm Bree Clark. With me is Eddie Yoon and Christopher Lockhead. Hey ho, let's go. All right, topic 1. Welcome back to the Pirate Street Journal. We are talking about the battle of the stack. Every tech era is a 6-layer board, and the company everyone crowns in year 1 is rarely the one holding the crown at the end. Topic 2 is the power lottery. One square on that board almost nobody owns right now and might be the only one that matters, and the favorite to win isn't a company, it's a country. Topic 3, Korea. 2 chip companies are on track to cover half a nation's debt and tax. It's the first live test of who actually gets rich when AI works. We are recording on Friday, June 5th. Hey ho, let's go. On to topic 1, the battle of the stack. Every tech era runs on a stack of 6 layers: power, internal hardware, infrastructure, operating system, end user hardware, applications. Companies in the rows, layers in the columns, a bingo board for who owns what. So if we run the tape, in the PC era, IBM led on hardware, Microsoft won on software, and in the dot-com era, Intel led and Microsoft won again. Social and mobile, Microsoft led, Apple won. The hardware king wins the first 2 years. The company that stacks the most valuable layers wins the last 2. The leader of the opening act is never the integrator of the close every single time. Today, the open has one king, Nvidia, over $5 trillion, one layer, and if the pattern holds, that's the seat that gets re-rated. So, the fight that everyone's glued to, OpenAI versus Anthropic, is the wrong one. The real fight is Nvidia versus the playbook that's won every era since 1985. Microsoft is reaching for most of the board. Alphabet owns more layers than people realize, and Elon is wielding Tesla, SpaceX, and xAI into one company going for all 6. You don't win the board by filling every square, you win by owning the most valuable rows. But if you're going to be wrong on the right side of the S curve. So, Eddie, everyone's watching OpenAI versus Anthropic. If the real fight is Anthropic versus Microsoft, who's already sitting on the most valuable rows?
Well, this is the most fun, TV show that I can imagine. Like, this is more, you couldn't write this stuff, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Elon has beef with everybody, obviously with Sam Altman, with the lawsuit that he lost with the Anthropic, accusing them of being woke. And then lo and behold, he strikes a deal with Dario, and there we go, right? Because he'd rather stick it to OpenAI than anybody else. But what you're looking at,
There is something practical about Elon. I know that he's a controversial figure, but
he's principled and practical at the same time. Absolutely.
right when he got into his big fight and gave Trump the middle finger and left, he said he was going to start an independent party, and he was going to do this, and he was going to do that. Fast forward, less than a year later, and he's on the Air Force One to China, right?
Yeah. So the key part is the chessboard, and that I think that's the thing is, like, if you're looking at the SpaceX IPO on June 12th, and then Anthropic filed as OpenAI has filed to go public in the fall, if you're trying to pick a winner, you have to think about it in category design terms, not within the column, but across the columns, and that's the whole point. It's chess, not checkers, and that now 2 things can be true at the same time, which is exactly, Bree, as you laid out, that hardware generally wins early, software wins late. But in this case, early and late, these definitions are up for grabs, right? Because the PC era was a decade plus. The dot-com era, was a little bit more compressed. The social mobile era, we compressed a couple. The AI era is just starting. I don't think this is going to be a short one. And so the definition of early is really the real question mark here, because Jensen is a rock star, and Nvidia is not going anywhere anytime soon. They are sold out. What he said was, "I have a line of sight into $1 trillion of demand over the next 2 years or so." Right? Those words have not ever been put together in that sentence on any earnings call beforehand. Right? And then you look at what Elon just said with Jamie Dimon. Here's another one, Christopher. Tesla, JP Morgan famously sued each other, and now, Jamie Dimon's made nice with Elon, made nice. Why? Because they're part of the deal, taking them public and whatnot.
And this is something that sort of people have to learn to be successful, right? It's like, on one hand, You want to have strong core values? Absolutely. And you want to be ethical and you want to be transparent, etc. And you want to be a warrior. Warriors win. On the other hand, you also have to be practical in the moment, right? And so finding the line there can be challenging for some people. But look, if what there is to do for the two parties to be successful, whether they're two countries or two businesses that are direct competitors, or in this case, adjacencies, which is really important, sometimes we have to say, well, wait a minute, given the current circumstances, we're going to choose something different, particularly when trying to figure out the game board across the value stack.
That's the key. I think just as you laid out is the reason why I think people are setting aside pettiness for practicality is exactly what Christopher you just laid out is that the winner is not the person with the best LLM. It is not the person with the best chip. It is the person that establishes the greatest portfolio across the stack. And that's what we see is that, why was Microsoft and Intel successful was that their Wintel gave them both internal hardware and operating system across that. And why was Apple successful was that they were able to cross multiple parts, including hardware and applications at the time too. So these are the thing that you're looking for is who's going to win across the stack.
And if you think about a tech stack, back in the day, we used to talk about what are the control points in the tech stack. So the operating system used to be much more of a control point than it is today, right? And interestingly enough, the value in the stack, as the stack gets built out, tends to go from bottom to top. Hardware, software that makes hardware work, software that makes networks and databases work, et cetera, till you get to what the consumer, the customer, the user uses. And so there's an interesting thing here that I think a lot of people miss, which is technology never took a job from anybody. What technology does is change where value lives. So if you go back all the way to the early days of the internet, by way of example, we had to build what was called 3-tier applications at the time. I won't get into what that means. People who were there know. And there was a company called BEA that had a product called WebLogic that essentially category designed the market for this middle tier, this web server, right? And for a while, BEA was the hottest company in the world because you had to have that part of the stack to make truly scalable applications that were purpose built for the web, right? Well, guess what? As that stack got established and they became a standard, people focused more on what? The applications where the user was. And ultimately, because BEA stayed in their category for too long, they became the category king, they won. But, and this is why the value stack conversation we're having matters so much, the value of their category got devalued as the stack got built out. And ultimately, they got acquired by Oracle and just got built into the stack. And the value went to the application companies like Salesforce and ServiceNow.
And this is where I think a lot of what we talk about in the annual strategy planning trap, Christopher and Bree, like it is not, there's three ways of doing strategy. And most people pick one of the first two. I'm better. I'm the best. Now, or I could win the bingo card for being the most different. Across the stack is really what we're talking about, right? Because, when Microsoft was dominant, which is, again, a side note of Microsoft being dominant across multiple eras, PC era, .com social, and still relevant in the next couple, social mobile, and then now today in AI.
Stunning.
An amazing, amazing job. So it just
especially
goes to show,
when you consider the fact that under the bomber regime for the better part of a decade, there was no innovation of consequence. Matter of fact, there was a lot of failures like the Microsoft Store and several others, right? And he was slow to move the company to the cloud and slow to move the company to subscription, et cetera, et cetera. And so they were so dominant across the stack in the prior 2 or 3, depending on how you want to think about it, eras, that they could actually take a decade off and still, with a legendary leader that they have today, Nadella, be where they are today, which is in a dominant position in multiple places in the value stack.
Well, so much so that if you had put $10,000 into Microsoft at its 1986 IPO, you'd have $80 million at the end of last year, right? Even with the decade.
That's why
off
I'm
that
so
we're talking
rich,
about.
Eddie.
That's absolutely. What? And so here's a salient point for those of you who are looking at the SpaceX IPO on June 12th. right? And they're trying to make it available to retail investors to get in. Just know the math, and we write about this in the Pirate Street Journal report, deep dive. Do the math. Know that playing the IPO game is generally very dangerous within the first year. However, if you
Hold
were
on, hold on. I
thinking
hate to
about
interrupt you, Eddie, but people need to know the wizard of category weird science went to work for us on the IPOs and created this amazing document, this Pirate Street Journal deep dive document, deep research. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, Eddie, but roughly what it felt like somewhere around 50 of the
it's a sea
IPOs.
of red.
It's a
It's
sea
just
of
like
red for the first year,
first
basically.
year. Yeah.
So those who, and this is not investment advice. We're not investment advisors. And some of us failed out at the grade 3 math. But all that said, when you look at the data, buying at the IPO is generally not a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes, Eddie?
Within the first year. And so that's why pirates with a long-term horizon, remember, we talk about Microsoft as a category king across different eras for 4 decades. In part, you have to have held for 4 decades for that to have played out. So just remember, it's your horizon that matters first. Number 2, think about your thinking. Don't think the better game. Don't worry about does Claude have the better, love it, Brie. Does Claude have the better LLM than ChatGPT? You want to think about different, right? Whether or not you choose to buy and hold an Anthropic or an OpenAI should be a function of you believe they are going to do the cuddle with the Jamie Dimons of the world to buy, partner, or JV with somebody else in the value stack so that they get the bingo in a different way than anybody else. And so it's a little more thinking. It's a much longer horizon, but don't be so smart you're stupid on this one. Be careful.
Wow, 20 seconds to spare. All right.
That was just the warning bongos.
Quick break, pirates. Everything Pirate Eddie just said about the consumer, he's been saying things like that for 20 years across Harvard Business Review and now Category Pirates. Everything Pirate Christopher just said about category design, he literally wrote the book on it. 3-time public company CMO, co-author of Play Bigger. Now imagine both brains on demand for your business, your career, your next decision. That's the Pirate Eddie bot and the Pirate Christopher bot, trained on every Category Pirates mini book ever written, every super consumer framework, every creator capitalist take, and every category design playbook. You ask, they answer, in their voice with their lens. They come with the founding tier on Substack, alongside the full mini book library, the audiobook library, digital copies of all 7 of our big books, and every Scooby snack we drop. You can find it at categorypirates.news/subscribe. Now let's get back into the next topic.
Moving on to topic 2, the power lottery. We're going back to the board. And if you're curious about this board we keep talking about, it'll be in the Pirate Street report below, available to our monthly and founding subscribers. So you can take the visual and the deep dive and all of it. So 5 layers are a knife fight. There's the first column, power, and it's almost empty. Microsoft is restarting 3 Mile Island. Anthropic is renting all of Colossus, and on a lease, Musk can claw back on 90 days' notice. Everybody is scrambling for electricity, but scrambling for power and owning power are not the same thing. Renting the water in the desert is not the same thing as owning the well. The only name with the power square filled is Elon. Everyone else is a tenant right now. So here's the math. If power is the binding constraint of the AI era, and it is, the era might not get won by a company at all. America is voting down centers out of town, 48 projects and $156 billion blocked or delayed for data centers. China is building power like it's wartime, adding capacity faster than America can permit it. Best models, best chips, best apps, none of it matters if you can't plug it in. So, Christopher, America's voting down these data centers out of town while China pours concrete. Does a country just walk off with the AI era while Silicon Valley argues about benchmarks?
Well, what's happening is insane. And as we have talked about in the past, the AI leadership gets an F. And Anthropic keeps doing it. They came out and said some horrible things about what AI might do, and they're freaking everybody out yet again. It's the weirdest marketing strategy in history to freak everybody out about your category. But it works because it keeps the attention on the category. So the reality is, this is the greatest opportunity from an infrastructure perspective that America's had, or certainly one of them, in quite some time. We need a massive energy build out for AI. And here's what most people don't understand. in places where there are massive restrictions on what we can and can't do, we don't do them. So, for example, in California, and I know this is going to sound outrageous to some, and I would challenge you to think about this. In California, we can't build or fix anything. We can't fix the roads. We have a bridge in our town that is about the length of a 737, a bridge, a tiny bridge that happens to be a major artery. It's a $50 million retrofit for earthquakes, and it's going to take 3 years. I asked the AIs if such a project existed in Singapore, what would it take? And they said 9 months and $5 to $8 million. And it would be a little more than that if it happened in Texas. So what do we have going on here? Our inability to build is really hurting us to access the future. And here's what most people don't realize. Texas is ahead of California in green energy. Wrap your head around that, in solar and in wind. And so Texas, by way of example, has opened the door to Elon and others to build massive data centers. And they're going to win as a result. Another thing that Elon is, of course, doing is he's getting to data centers in space because he realizes if America won't let him build the technology future, then he'll just build it in space. And so this is a big mistake we're making. Now, one thing that's important, we do need governance. We do need transparency. And if there's concern that that these data centers are going to drive costs up for regular Americans, we need to address that concern. And we sort of talked about it the other day. But some of these companies may even want to find ways for regular consumers to benefit from these data centers, and we can talk about that. But the bottom line is America needs to win the entire AI stack business. And if we are beholden to China or anybody else for energy, or that energy exists somewhere else that gets turned into tokens that get turned into AI outcomes ahead of us, we're in trouble. The United States must win the AI stack the exact same way that we won the internet stack.
Well, and one thing that's just to be a sobering fact, Christopher and Bree, that I saw was that the number one source of education for most politicians in Wall Street was law school. The number one source of education for politicians in China was engineering. So that kind of tells you everything that you need to know, right? Is that in China, they can do the science, they can do the math, and they understand that more power is just more abundance for everybody, whether it goes to a data center or something else with it, but they're certainly building it out for there. And so what that means is that I don't think there is a path to structurally change the nature of the politicians that we have, which is just nature and their NIMBYism and everything else like that. However, that's at the federal level. However, at the local level, as you just laid out for Texas versus California, there's absolutely a way of doing it. Now, there's always going to be the obvious ones that people will rail about, like, oh, you can't put up a nuclear power plant, even though it's been proven to be safe. Oh, you can't do this or that or whatever else it is. So we're looking for non obvious solutions. And so, a non obvious solution number one is simply battery and battery storage. Is that the grid is designed, having done some work for utilities in the past, right? They're heavily regulated, and the grid is designed for maximum utility, meaning it's 100 degrees out in Mississippi, and the power needs to be able to provide that, or people die, right, as a result of that. So, the part of the equation that needs to be solved is if I have a grid that is built with high peak usage and low, usage on the other end, what needs to be true is if you just put and bought tons of batteries into whether they are at the individual homeowner level, like we have at our Einamile house, or at a mega pack level, a town or a city says, you know what, we want to build out a mega pack of tons of batteries like they did in Australia, where brownouts are regular, right? And say, hey, we're going to bank some power when the rates are low. And so when usage goes high, we have a back storage with her. So there's a way, I think mathematically, you could double the US grid simply by just flooding the US with batteries. And so a couple things that local states can do about that, right? Number one, you could invest in a power mega pack for your key areas. You could provide incentives for people to buy, not solar. Solar, people get nervous about people on my roof or this and that. Installing batteries is a much cheaper, lower lift. You can incentivize that through tax returns. And this is a call. The pirates are calling all entrepreneurs. Now, I don't know if this is legit or what. I saw this on X. There's a company called Span. And so we're going to love this one, is that as far as I understand it, what they do is not only do they provide batteries, but they provide GPUs for houses that have solar. So having, again, done the work that there are certain super geos across the country, Hawaii, Arizona, California, where there's a lot more prevalence of solar panels. Those panels tend to generate excess energy that cannot be captured or stored. And unless you have a grandfather deal with the local grid, you can't sell it back to the grid. So what Span is proposing to do is, hey, let us come in your backyard and either install or take advantage of your solar. Let us put a little mini GPU farm, in a little nook and corner next to your cucumbers and next to your pool or whatever else it is, a little GPU farm, and let us rent that compute out to the highest bidder in the same way that Elon has done with Colossus. And in exchange for that, they're going to pay for, you name it, you know, the majority of your utility bill so that you have price certainty within that. Because I will tell you, one of the saddest things that I discovered in my work with the local grid and utility companies was the number of consumers that go bankrupt, not because of credit card spending, not because of payday loan sharks, even though all that's bad, because they can't afford to pay their utility bill. And that's something that no one should go bankrupt for in a world where we could have an abundance of batteries and local consumer, a
Yes.
homeowner, extending their willingness to say, maybe I don't want a nuclear plant in my backyard, but I will take some GPUs and some panels and batteries in my personal backyard to provide support for the grid.
And to follow up on that point, so I was born in Montreal, Canada, which is in a province called Quebec. And Quebec is one of the places that is blessed with the most hydroelectric power. And the challenge for Quebec always, we used to joke that Quebec would be Saudi Arabia if you could package and sell electricity. The problem is electricity goes away if you don't if you don't put it on a wire and send it somewhere, which Quebec has done for years to Vermont and other places. Well, guess what's happening? In Quebec and in Vermont, they are investing in what? Utility scale battery storage. They're building it in Vermont so they can partner with Quebec. And Quebec is trying to do something similar. And so what does this tell us? It also says, if you think about super consumers and then the concept of super geos, right? If you want to be a songwriter, you go to Nashville. If you want to be an actor, you used to go to Hollywood. I don't know where you go now. Anyway, the point being, there are centers of excellence in geography, Silicon Valley for tech. And so interestingly, if you're a place that is blessed with, in this example, hydroelectric power, and you get forward on your skis in all the new categories of not just battery storage, but of course, there's going to be networks, and there's going to be networks of nuclear power as well. And so you can see all these things. Oh, I love the bongos. You can see all these things creating massive growth opportunities, economic opportunities broadly, and then specifically the geos who are in the old world, if you want to call it that, of power, if they get smart, they could set themselves up in the new categories of power, in this example, hydroelectric power with batteries, for multiple generations of economic growth that would be transformative to their region and keep them on the leading edge of AI.
All right, moving on to topic 3, the chip dividend. Add up Goldman's forecast for 2026 through 2028, and Samsung and SK Hynix throw off about $1.7 trillion in combined operating profit. Tax that at Korea's rate, and roughly $430 billion flows to the government. Korea's national debt is about $880 billion. Two companies making memory could cover half of it. You can see it on the ground near their campuses. Luxury sales went vertical. Jewelry is up 147, approximately. Watches up 85. Bonus season's hitting different over there. But this is a pirate story, not a finance story. Their labor minister called semiconductors a public good. There's a serious proposal to pay part of the windfall straight back to citizens as a dividend. And by law, some of it has to pay down the debt. Korea is the first live experiment in the question of the decade. When AI creates wealth the size of a national budget, does it flow down to everyone as abundance or up into the tightest concentration of wealth in history? So, Eddie, two companies could cover half a country's debt. Is this the first proof the AI build out pays off for everybody or the friendliest face yet on the biggest wealth grab in history?
Well, I do think what's interesting is that you have a precedent in Alaska, right? Alaska has what and Bree, you know this better, probably better than I, right? Is that my understanding is that there's something called the PFD, the Permanent Fund Dividend, where every Alaska resident receives an equal payout that comes from the oil that Alaska generates. Alaska is blessed with abundance from an oil perspective. They have more abundance than they need. And guess what happens? You get a check just for living there. That's called the super geo, right? And so SK Hynix and Samsung are proving that Korea, again, you think about a country that was impoverished in the 1950s through the Korean War, and they've gone from poverty to cars to semiconductors, and they bet big on memory. And a little bit of a zebra hole here. Why is memory going through the roof? Why is Micron over the moon? It's because would you rather have a smarter LLM or a pretty good smart LLM that remembers everything you've ever told it? Memory is the precious commodity right now, not just the model speed, because context is king. And for us to have a great LLM experience, you'd rather have a friend who remembered everything and could advise you and be your friend through that long standing context. That's why longtime friends are worth their weight in gold versus somebody who was so smart but had the memory of a goldfish, right? And so that's kind of what Korea has done an amazing job of betting big, and that they are the only country in the world aside from the US with $2 trillion market cap companies. And so what we are saying actually is that Alaska, Korea shows the path that a country has the ability not to raise tax rates, but to create the conditions for massive abundance in a way that is not normal, so that the normal tax rate on massive abundance could pay for remarkable things. Now, let me get back to the numbers, because the numbers that Bree shared were kind of earth shattering, right? It's Korean won, not US dollars. So you got to discount it by about 1,000 or so, give or take. And Korea has been historically very conservative on its national debt just because of their history with the IMF crisis. Like, they're very, very conservative on that. So can a like happen thing in the US? Possibly. The math is going to be slightly different, obviously. However, when you look at the pace at which Anthropic and OpenAI are growing at ARRs that have never been seen before, it doesn't take a lot of math to figure out that maybe I should hold tax rates steady and let the golden goose get fatter and fatter versus choke the golden goose too early with that. And that if Korea is actually looking at a situation where you can credibly solve national debt through abundance, we have to look at that hard too, because there's only three ways out of the US debt situation. You can raise taxes, which is going to kill the golden goose. You can print money, which is going to hurt the average consumer much more than anybody else, and that's the path that we're currently on. You can cut entitlements, which is never going to happen, right? And the last one is you set the conditions for massive abundance thanks to AI, and lo and behold, what is happening in Korea, what has happened in Alaska, could absolutely happen here. You just have to be willing to design the future and design the conditions on the ground to allow that to happen.
Now, what do we have going on in the excited states? We have Bernie Sanders, who came out very recently and made the following proposal. The United States government should take ownership of 50% of Anthropic, OpenAI, XAI, etc., so that, in his words, the American public can benefit from their growth and success economically. Okay, so what do we have here? We have one country doubling down on what I would call responsible capitalism and a level of taxation on growth of breakaway companies that is, you tell me, I'm sure they argue about it in Korea, but at some level is acceptable to the companies and at some level is acceptable to the government / the people. That the trade there, they've gotten to a place that everybody can live with, even if everybody's not in love with. Here, we're proposing the takeover of AI companies, as opposed to what Korea is doing, which is, you know what? These companies will pay taxes. And if we enable the growth, then tax the growth as opposed to try to kill the growth by taking ownership of it, we really have something here. And look, I just looked it up again to make sure that I'm grounded. So in 1926, which is 100 years ago, global GDP was somewhere around 5 to 6 trillion. And today, global GDP is around 126 trillion in 100 years. And so this is the part that people miss. When we enable creator capitalists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and category designers to create new value from nowhere or from very little, right? The sum total demand for generative AI in September of 2022 was 0. Now it's the fastest growing category ever created by human beings out of nothing, right? A whole new market appeared. And so when human beings see value, they chase that value for good reason, right? And so when you understand that when a country creates the conditions for legendary value creation, which is what entrepreneurs and creator capitalists do, and then a partnership with the private sector that says, because we create the infrastructure, AKA the environment, AKA the country that allows you to thrive, we want a piece of the action, but we want to do it in taxes. This is the path forward, as opposed to taking control of companies. Can you imagine what would happen to innovation in the United States if the American government said, for hot companies, we're now going to take 50% control of you when you register to go public? Can you imagine what would happen to America in the race to win the AI stack if that became the law of the land? We would lose.
100%. And I think in part of what we are trying to do at Pirate Street Journal, and I think what, as you said, the AI marketing team gets an F, but what we all need to do is that this is not business as usual. This is not the same thing as, hey, a Pentium chip goes to, a 486 to something else. Like it's not an incremental shift. And I don't even know if exponential is the right way to describe it. It's yes, it is, but like
We've never seen curves like this.
we've never seen curves like this.
They're like
And,
straight up. It's not even a curve. It says, Bree, it might be the stairway to heaven.
well, but my hope would be for the Bernie Sanders of the world is that please don't view this as your path to win the next election. Please view it as your path to get into the history books for the next 100 years. If you can be the politician that stewards a golden goose and allows abundance to take hold such that it rains abundance on everybody else, like in Korea, super of one is a super of nine. Who knew that semiconductors and AI hardware or memory would go up such that jewelry and ding dong watches are going through the roof as well too, right? It all cascades down.
You're saying it's a good time to be a Rolly dealer in in South Korea right now?
Apparently, yes.
Not if I want to buy a new Rolex, I should not go to Seoul.
No, you should not. And
the other thing too that needs to be said, look, I at some level I appreciate a Bernie-like POV in that we need to have a counterbalance for sure, and there needs to be governance, and there are critical things to be concerned about. That said, if I go back to, because I was part of a minuscule part of, but the build out of the internet back in the 90s, we had a Democratic government, the Clinton administration, for 8 years. And the Clinton administration today would be unrecognizable to the vast majority, particularly of younger people who vote Democrat, because the Clinton administration had a lot of the social leanings that you would typically expect from Democrats. And at the same time, they were pro-innovation and pro-growth and pro-business. You can be these things, but today the position of Clinton, if you took Clinton's position with the internet, there are those bongos. But if you took the Clinton administration position towards the internet and landed today and said that was America's position with AI, people would say that's a more right-wing position. So it's just fascinating over time that that's happened. We've gone from Clinton and Gore empowering the internet responsibly and to Bernie and AOC trying to shut data centers and AI. We've gone too far here, people. There is a path forward that can work for individual Americans. It's critical that America as a country and us as a people benefit from this technology. That is absolutely the case. Let's do it by enabling growth, enabling new categories of innovation, and putting the right structures in place to make sure we all benefit. That's an important thing. And I love that dynamic tension between left and right. But when we have insanity on either side, it's just not helpful.
We'll see you next week, Pirates.